Hey guys, Pixelpar here, and today we're looking at the Breath of the Wild sequel teaser trailer that Nintendo brought to E3 this year. Now there's only about just over a minute's worth of footage to look at, but there's loads of little details packed into it. So let's rewind the video back to the very start, because we don't want to miss anything. Now during these two initial opening scenes, we can see some kind of green light emitting from what appears to be a corpse. And although it looks like a corpse, it could at this point also be a Sheikah monk. But the main thing here is this green light that seems to kind of host these swirling characters. And there's two interesting characters in this scene. There's this one here, which closely resembles either a J or an S from the Gerudo language. And then just as the scene fades away, we get one more symbol which is really useful, and it's got 3 spikes on it, which make it really easy to identify in other scenes. As we progress through the trailer, we get to see this corpse or body or monk within this chamber here, and there seems to be malice coming from it, so there's a clear link to Ganon here. And if you look really closely, you can actually see that the origin of all these swirling letters seems to come from this ghostly hand, which is resting on the chest. There also seems to be these pillars pointing inwards towards the body, and they kind of have symbols on them similar to Sheikah technology. And the fact that they're all pointing inwards and focusing on the body makes them seem important. Maybe they're being used for some kind of ritual or spell, and they're significant to this scene. And if you look at the floor, it looks like something's broken and forced its way upwards into this mound of broken rock. And you can actually see malice coming from the body, going directly upwards to this structure on the ceiling. So it's possible that the broken floor and this surge of malice are actually related. But let's get back to these symbols, this swirling energy that seems to be emitted by a hand and goes upwards, enveloping the kind of structure on the ceiling. If you look closely, you can see that 3-pointed symbol. And alongside it is another symbol too. It kind of looks like a 5 over a 0 with a line through it and then an S underneath. Now here's the interesting thing. So far, everyone's looked at this initial symbol they saw in the opening scene and thought, hey, it looks like a Gerudo symbol, therefore all these other flowing characters must be Gerudo letters. And following that kind of logic, people have somehow made the word seal. I can kind of see it, but not really. It seems like a stretch. It's kind of making the characters fit to what you want them to fit to. And the characters that precede these ones, people believe they say Ganon. I just can't see it. So if these characters aren't Gerudo text, saying Seal Ganon or Ganon Seal, what are they? Well, if you actually look at this scene here, where we're looking through the middle from the top down into the swirling characters, you'll see 3 recognisable symbols here, and it's that 3-pointed symbol again. It also seems to repeat, meaning there's probably a pattern to these symbols. And considering this is the only character with 3 solid points on, it's probably its final form, as there's not much opportunity for swirling characters to form solid triangular spikes. You can actually see this character forming here. If you follow the white circle, you'll see lines quickly come in, take shape to form the character, and then hold their shape. Now look at the bottom right. In this circle we see the character formed and slowly break away into these swirling components. Now considering we know how it forms and how it disperses, and we know that it holds this in-between state, I think it's fairly safe to assume that the intentional shape is the one with 3 spikes. Now those of you that were paying attention would have noticed that the symbol that immediately follows it does exactly the same thing. So we can now see that there's a definite repeated pattern here. And do you remember that 5-0 S shape from the previous scene? Well, if we flip it upside down, because we're now viewing from the inside out, you can see that it appears multiple times within this swirl, and it seems to appear just before the 3 spiked symbol. Now rather than going through every single individual symbol here, I'm just going to colour code them and highlight them so you can see the repeated symbols within this swirl. And based on this, we can start to kind of form what could be a whole repeated pattern. And the primary one here, in full view, is on the left hand side. And I'll highlight it here. Okay, now you've had a minute to soak those in, let's get the symbols down on paper, and first up is that 3-pointed symbol, followed by what I like to call the cloud over a hill, and kind of like a wind swirl. And then we have this kind of conglomerate, which doesn't really take shape in any of the shots here. So for now we're just going to put that down as a mystery. And then next up we have the yellow symbol through to the red symbol, which ends on that 5-0 shape that we kept seeing. And based on the pattern we see within this kind of swirl, it's presumed the next character after the 5-0 character would be the 3-pointed symbol, yet again, repeating the pattern. However, there is still one mystery here, and that's those characters in the middle, the conglomerate. We need to know what the individual characters are when they break up, and in this scene they seem to break up off screen. And to get those characters, all we have to really do is rewind the video slightly. And if you look in the top right hand corner, you can see that the pattern follows our current pattern, but we also get those middle characters. So let's get the 2 on the end down on our reference sheet, and then rewind the video slightly and get the other 2 symbols on our reference sheet. Now we've completed our reference sheet, we've got the best representation of the characters in this swirl possible, from this trailer anyway. But we do need to keep in mind we were looking from the inside out, and if we were looking the other way around, from the outside in, the characters would all be flipped. And then we need to consider the fact that we were looking from the top down, and if people were looking from the floor upwards, then the characters would all be flipped again on the other axis. Confused yet? Don't worry, this is how it works. Imagine you're the point on the ceiling, this bit here. If you were viewing from this point of view, the point on the ceiling, you'd be looking from the top inside the spiral. Now imagine you just stumbled upon this, you're walking past and you saw it. Your view would be pretty much the view that we've got in the screen now, and you'd be roughly where the red arrow is, on the floor, viewing from the outside. And we can use this alternate view to verify the characters we collected from the point of ceiling view. If you look at the 2 circles and compare them, you'll see that the characters pretty much match up perfectly. There are some slight variations, but this is mainly due to them swirling as they go around. Now let's take a look at the opening scene again. You'll notice as the characters go past that the 3-pointed symbol and the cloud and hill symbol don't actually match either of our current views. Well, they do, but the problem is they're in the order of the point on the ceiling view and the orientation of the bystander view. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we're looking at a third perspective here. And if you actually take the characters from the point on the ceiling view inside the spiral and flip them upside down, we get this brand new view from the floor inside the spiral. And this is the view from the body or the hand. And conveniently, in this opening scene, this is the sound that we hear as these symbols go by. Yes, that's a heartbeat. So we know now that this opening scene is actually the body viewing the spiral of characters surrounding it, and it does have a heartbeat during this opening scene, which means it's alive. And anyone who's watched the trailer already all the way through knows that this is verified later on. Now, did you spot the oddity in this scene? If you compare it again, you'll notice that the 3-pointed symbol is facing the wrong way. However, all the letters are in the correct order, so this isn't a case of viewing from inside out or top to bottom. For some reason, each individual character has been flipped separately, individually, and this is really odd. Now, there's only 2 reasons I can think of that would explain this situation, and the first one is that the developer, or whoever rendered this scene, simply screwed up, and admittedly, that's not very interesting. Now, the second option, which is a lot more interesting, is that this was done on purpose, and these characters have been mirrored because they're being viewed from an alternate world or a mirror world. And this is something that's come up in Zelda games before. It happened in A Link Between Worlds where we had Hyrule and Lorule, and we've also had it to some extent in games like Twilight Princess, where there's an alternate world which is connected to Hyrule. And this might actually be the case with Breath of the Wild's sequel. Now, before we move on from these symbols, and I promise we will move on from these symbols, I just want to point out a few things with this intro scene. Firstly, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, you'll notice that in addition to the middle section and beginning section, we actually get the end sequence too. And these final characters are just hidden away, tucked in the background. And if you look at the middle section here, in comparison to this opening scene, there seems to be an extra letter. And we know it exists because we saw it higher up in the spiral near the top. but at this point in the trailer, wherever this is being filmed from, it doesn't seem to appear yet. And last but not least, this doesn't appear to be Gerudo text, and it doesn't appear to be Hylian either, or Ancient Hylian or any variation over the series. In fact, I wasn't able to match it up with anything, and in my opinion, that just means it's a brand new language, and it's probably going to play a prominent role in the Breath of the Wild sequel. Anyway, enough of the symbols. Let's look at the footage we skipped over, and here we can see either Link or Zelda holding a torch up to a cave painting. And if you actually look at the cave painting here, it's done in a similar style to the Breath of the Wild tapestry, meaning it probably depicts something that happened in the past. And it seems to show someone riding into battle on a horse, and they're wielding a trident, which is something Ganon's known to do in previous Zelda titles, but not in his human form, Ganondorf. However, this character has a Gerudo symbol on their back, and they kind of look like Ganondorf. In this scene, it's hard to see everything at once. The camera pans and the lighting's flickering and changing, so to get a good view of everything, we need to kind of stitch together multiple shots and rebuild them so we can actually see what was on the wall. And once you get a good look at it, you can see this character's not by themselves. They're joined by 4 other people, and they all appear to be riding into battle. At the front, we've got 2 characters here, and they seem to be holding spears, and they're leading the charge forward. This character that resembles Ganon is in the middle, and then there's 2 characters at the back, and they're both archers shooting from horseback. Now it's clear that these characters are riding into battle. They've got their weapons drawn, and the bows are drawn too, ready to fire arrows. But we don't know who they're fighting, and we can't see that in this trailer, so we'll just have to concentrate on who these people are. And based on looks, traits, and the Gerudo symbol, the middle character probably is Ganondorf. As for the other 4 characters, well, it's hard to tell. The only thing that kind of gives them away is that they're all wearing similar headgear. They don't seem to have any tribal patterns on them, like a Gerudo symbol, but they do all appear to be from the same tribe. And this headgear they're wearing, all of them seem to have 3 ponytails coming from the back of their headgear. And this is kind of important, because it's our only indication, our only clue, as to who they could actually be. So let's review what we know about this tribe. They seem to use spears and bows, and based on this wall painting, they're experienced in fighting in wars, or at least one war. Their headgear or their hair features 3 ponytails, and they seem to follow, or they're allies of, Ganondorf, or the Ganondorf lookalike we saw. And other than their headgear, there seems to be no other recognisable emblems or symbols representing their tribe. There's no Gerudo symbol, or anything like that. So where does this leave us? Well, in Breath of the Wild, there is an ancient tribe that no longer exists, that mysteriously vanished, and all that's left in Hyrule to remember them by are ancient ruins and a set of armour. And this set of armour is called the Barbarian set, and it just so happens to feature 3 ponytails at the back, and the hair seems to resemble that of Ganon's. And if we actually look at the in-game description for the armour, it says that the armour was once favoured by an ancient warlike tribe from the Faron region. So if these are the same tribes, that would explain how they know how to use spears and bows, and they clearly have experience fighting in wars, because they are a warlike tribe. It also explains why we don't see a recognisable emblem or symbol. And this could be because the developers wanted to keep them mysterious, or it could be because we simply never encounter them in Breath of the Wild, as they mysteriously vanished. The tribe did, however, leave behind plenty of ruins, and thanks to the Breath of the Wild creating a Champions book, there's plenty of text which heavily suggests that this ancient barbarian-like tribe were actually called the Zonai. And the word Zonai in itself is actually a pun in Japanese on the word mysterious. And both these tribes share so many similarities, they must be one and the same. They were both savage or warlike, and they were both based in Faron. And both tribes have mysteriously been lost to time and have become unknown. However, there is some extra text on the Zonai, and that says that they're strong magic wielders, and that they disappeared from Hyrule, and it's one of Hyrule's greatest mysteries where they went, why they went. So it could be that this Zonai tribe are actually the same tribe depicted in the wall paintings, and they could have been followers of Ganondorf, or allies to Ganondorf, and the reason they mysteriously vanished is because Ganondorf was sealed away. And the Zonai also left ruins everywhere, and they seem to depict a serpent or a dragon, and these are in Faron, but you can also see them throughout Hyrule. They've even got this kind of swirl flick, which seems to be their trademark or their logo, and the serpent or dragon face is used throughout, and these Zonai towers also exist in Hyrule, but according to Creating a Champion, their use is unknown. There are rumours that they were used for magical purposes, however this is unsubstantiated, and there's no actual evidence that that's what their original purpose was for. In Breath of the Wild, these Zonai towers are quite bland, plain pillars that reach up into the sky. However, if we actually look at the concept art from Creating a Champion, we can see that the Zonai pillars, the Zonai towers, actually did have a lot of symbolism on them that matched up with the other ancient ruins that we see from the tribe. You can even see the two serpent heads above each other on the actual Zonai pillars. And the Zonai also built labyrinths. However, it's never really confirmed that it is the Zonai, but all the designs match up to those in Faron, and if you actually read the developer's notes in Creating a Champion, they kind of give it away a little bit and suggest that that is pretty much the case. They are Zonai built labyrinths. The layout concept for the labyrinths are also labelled as Zonai maze layout concepts. And this is exactly where you find a barbarian armor. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great, I've learnt loads about the Zonai, but I don't really see how this is relevant besides those people on the cave painting may have been Zonai. Well, I promise you it will become more relevant the further we get through this video. Now, one of the next scenes we see in the trailer is of Link and Zelda walking through what appears to be some kind of ancient ruins, and they appear to be in a temple of some sort, or in a cave, because there's very little light here and they seem to be using torches to light their path. And we can tell this is an old location because there's chunks missing off the wall that have fallen off over time, and they don't seem to be maintained at all. So we can presume this is some kind of ancient temple or something similar. And I'm sure you haven't missed the giant beast that Zelda seems to be riding on, and this appears to be some kind of ox that's probably new to the Zelda franchise. I haven't seen exactly the same thing before, but it appears to be their mount, their ride, and it seems to be carrying a lot of gear. And at the front we can see Link, and he's actually holding a leather strap or a string here, and seems to be leading the ox carrying Zelda. Based on the gear that's loaded onto this ox-like animal, Link and Zelda are obviously expecting a long stay here. You can see on the back they've got a woodcutter's axe and a whole heap of wood that they've stockpiled to take with them. They also seem to have a sleeping bag on the back of the ox, and if you look at it, you can tell it's a sleeping bag because it looks extremely similar to the one that Beedle carries in Breath of the Wild. There's obviously more equipment here, and it's strapped to the side of the ox and it's in these bags. And we don't actually know what's in the bags at this point, but we know there's probably a lot of stuff they brought with them, so they were expecting to go on a long journey. And if you actually look at the back of the ox on the top left hand side, you can see that they've actually brought a lantern and a pickaxe. So they probably expected to be doing some kind of excavation, or actually exploring deep into a mountain or into a temple where there was limited access. You can also see what looks like a shield at the bottom, however it seems to have a handle on it. So I presume this is actually some kind of cooking pot or something along those lines rather than a shield. Zelda herself seems to be wearing research gear rather than her princess getup, so she was expecting to go down into this place and do some research of some sort anyway. As Link and Zelda progress further through this temple corridor, we get to see all these designs that are on the wall, and the most interesting one is the one closest to the camera on the left hand side. And it's interesting because it looks a lot like the Zonai serpent head that we see in other Zonai ruins. This might mean that what they're exploring is actually an ancient Zonai temple, or something similar to that. Possibly another area that's been excavated, and they've just discovered this new location. Now the last thing to note in this scene are these 3 Luminous Stones, and according to Breath of the Wild's in-game description, some believe that these stones glow because they hold the souls of the dead. They also seem to be glowing a very similar colour to the way that we saw those letters glowing earlier in the trailer. And let's not forget, we did see a corpse and we did hear a heartbeat, and this was at the bottom of this spiral of characters, so it's very possible that all 3 of these things are linked in some way. Moving on, we see Link and Zelda discover this corpse in his hand, and rather than concentrating on the corpse and hand at the moment, because we do get a better look later, let's look at Link and Zelda here instead. Firstly, you'll notice that Zelda's had a haircut. Her hair's a lot shorter now, and there could be multiple reasons for this. It could be symbolic, meaning change or moving forward. It could be tied to an event in the storyline that we just haven't seen yet. Or the change could be due to a more gameplay or technical orientated purpose. If Zelda were to play a more prominent role, or even be a playable character at any point during the sequel, her previous long flowing hairstyle would probably restrict the view, or even possibly clip through any weapons or bows or shields attached to her back. And having Zelda as a playable character certainly isn't out the question for Breath of the Wild's sequel. It's something Aonuma talked about back in 2017 with Eurogamer's Tom Phillips. In an interview there he said that a playable female protagonist is a possibility in future. And fast forward to E3 2019, with an interview with Jason Schreier, Aonuma chuckled and said he couldn't say whether Zelda was a playable character or not in the sequel, and he also refused to answer the question of how many playable characters there were in the sequel, simply responding with, "I can't say." Now this neither confirms or deconfirms a playable Zelda, or any other alternative playable characters for that matter, which means at this point, and in this trailer, a playable Zelda remains a viable reason as to why her hair has been adjusted. Zelda also appears to be wearing a hooded cape in this shot, and this item is brand new to Breath of the Wild, having not appeared in the game until now. The emblem or design featured on the back seems to indicate that this is a royal hood, as similar designs can be seen on both King Roam's chest, Zelda's research gear, and Zelda's ceremonial dress. Looking over at Link, we can see that strapped to his back is the one and only Master Sword, confirming that this takes place after the events of the previous game, which, is generally what a sequel is. However, Zelda games traditionally begin with the player having zero or extremely basic weapons, so unless Nintendo have decided to mix up the formula, this scene must either be from later in the game, or something must happen at the beginning that renders Link and the Master Sword essentially useless, otherwise you'd start the game extremely overpowered. And this could be achieved by either Link not being the primary playable character, the Master Sword having been returned in order for it to be recharged or restored, or the Master Sword being lost or stolen. Link also appears to be wearing the Champion's Tunic along with the Hylian Hood, both of which are armour items from the original Breath of the Wild. However, there is a slight twist here, as both of these items appear to have been adjusted. The Champion's Tunic seems to have been modified and now incorporates elements from the Hylian Tunic. The leather shoulder armour and the accompanying chestplate built into the Hylian Tunic can now be seen paired with the Champion's one instead. Even the gloves and chainmail that Link's wearing here belong to the Hylian Tunic, not the Champion's one. So what's going on here? Well, it's possible that Nintendo have decided to allow players even more freedom with their choice of armour in the sequel, mixing and matching elements of past armour to create different gear. Previously, gloves were tied to the tunic, and this couldn't be changed without changing the entire torso armour, the entire tunic. Sequel might actually break this down further and separate the gloves into their own item. Likewise with the leather armour, previously any over armour, like that seen on top of the Hylian tunic, were tied to the tunic. These two could now have been separated, allowing players to select a tunic as an undergarment and pair it with whatever armour they want on top. If you look at the Hylian Hood that Link's wearing, you can see that that's been adjusted too. In Breath of the Wild, the hood was permanently up over the head when worn. However, in the sequel, it appears as though it can now be worn down, with the hood resting on Link's back instead. This too could be an additional option for players to choose from, wearing the hood up or wearing it down. Another possibility is that Nintendo simply wanted to refresh Link's look slightly in the sequel, and the hood being down could simply be there because they wanted the viewers to see how the character was clearly Link in the teaser trailer. This reasoning is far less exciting, but also completely plausible. However, providing players with even more armour customization, and more customization with hoods, etc., certainly seems viable too, so it could go either way. Now the last thing to look at in this scene is the broken floor that this corpse or mummified body is actually stood on. I mentioned earlier that I thought it was broken and forced upwards, possibly by the calamity or some kind of other force. However, I don't think that's actually true now. If we compare this scene to the one that we saw before from the top, when we were looking at the spiral of characters, you can actually see that there are some steps leading to this, and it looks more like a pedestal than just a random broken floor. The next scene shows Link and Zelda stopping by a body of water while Zelda and the ox or buffalo-like beast take a drink, The lighting in here is just as dim as before, and they're still using torches to light their path. So it's clear at this point in their journey, they're still inside either a cave system or an ancient temple. And it just so happens that just like before, this area also shows signs of the Zonai tribe having been here in the past. If you look at the two broken pillars that are situated in the water, you can clearly see the serpent or dragon pattern found on the Zonai ruins in Hyrule. There also seems to be plenty of Luminous Stones here too, so it's extremely likely that this location is the same temple or cave system that we saw earlier in the trailer. And for those of you curious as to what Link was doing rummaging around in the bag, well, he was getting a water skin, so he could fill it up from the river that they've just stopped by. The next two scenes aren't particularly interesting. You have a mouse being consumed by the calamity, and that's spreading from the body we saw earlier. And then we have Link and Zelda trying to get their ox or buffalo mount across this bridge, and there's a break in the bridge so it doesn't want to cross it. And here we can see Zelda at the front pulling the ox, and Link at the back pushing it. And we know it's this way round because Zelda has white sleeves and the person at the front just happens to have white sleeves. And this is a bit of a role reversal from what we saw earlier in the trailer, where Link was leading the ox or buffalo and he was the one holding the lead. So maybe this is some kind of indication that you can potentially switch characters at some point in the game. Maybe at the start, maybe at any time during the game, or maybe this is just a scene that so happens to have the characters placed in this order. And just like all the other scenes that we've seen so far, this one is covered in luminous stones. There seems to be some kind of ancient ruin here in the form of a bridge, and there's no natural light. The next shot in the trailer is probably one of the most interesting ones so far. Link and Zelda are seen stood side by side, and Zelda becomes shocked by something she appears to see. The trailer then switches to another shot of a body and a ghostly hand, suggesting that these are what caused her reaction. However, this probably isn't the case, as Link, whose eyes also appear to be following the torch, doesn't seem to notice anything. Instead, his attention is only drawn to Zelda after she gasps. So Link simply appears to be reacting to Zelda, and isn't particularly aware of what she's spotted. Now, if we actually compare this scene to the one where we know for sure that Link and Zelda were actually looking at the body in hand, you can see that at this point, Link was holding the torch, and not Zelda. So unless this is another role reversal, it seems unlikely to be the same situation in both shots. Considering Link's lack of reaction, and the fact that Zelda is holding the torch here, it also seems extremely unlikely that what Zelda is reacting to is the body or ghostly hand, despite the trailer implying it with the shot that followed. So, what is Zelda reacting to? Well, it could be one of two things. Firstly, note the way Zelda moves her torch. It goes up and then across in a kind of arch shape. Meanwhile, Zelda's eyes seem to be looking up, focusing on something, and then move left to right as if reading or analysing the thing before her. It's at this point, while analysing what's in front of her, she becomes shocked by what she sees. Flash back to that wall painting shot we saw from earlier, where we see someone scan over the painted war scene, torch in hand, and note the way the torch moves. Yep, these two shots seem to be one and the same, but simply viewed from different angles. And that shot reaction just so happens to occur at the exact point that Zelda would have spotted the Ganondorf-like figure in the middle of the wall painting. Now, I did say there were two potential reasons why Zelda reacted the way she did, and while I'm convinced that she's studying the wall painting from before, there is something else particularly creepy going on at the same time in this trailer. So far, we've only been analysing the visual side of things, but tucked away in the audio seems to be a hidden message, and this message just happens to be heard at the exact moment Zelda reacts in shock. Whether these two events are related in the actual game, or have just simply been edited together into the same scene for the trailer, isn't particularly clear. However, this hidden message definitely carries some weight into what could potentially be going on in the sequel. Here's a snippet of the audio, mixed with the creepy music exactly as it appears in the trailer. Now, if you didn't hear the message, it's not that surprising, as Nintendo added it in backwards. So let's listen to it again, and this time we'll reverse the audio to see if you can spot the message. Still struggling to hear it? Not a problem. With a little bit of audio editing wizardry, we can strip away that creepy background music and isolate the message, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it perfectly clear now. Yes, it appears a spooky voice seems to be calling out, "Help us. Help us," suggesting that there's multiple people or beings that are in need of Link and Zelda's assistance. Interestingly, the call for help was reversed, and this isn't the first time we've seen mirrored or reversed things in this trailer. If you remember those unidentifiable symbols earlier in the trailer, they too had been individually reversed. And while it might be a leap of faith, it's very possible that both the reversed audio message, "Help us," and those mirrored characters could originate from an alternate or mirrored world, and this is potentially where the call for help comes from. Next up, we get a close-up shot of the body, surrounded by malice and these swirling symbols. And the first thing you'll notice here is a long, reddish burgundy hair that's coming from the body's head. And this just so happens to match the same colour of hair we saw in the barbarian headgear. Over in the top right, you can also see the Gerudo symbol, and this is displayed on the golden jewellery. And as the scene changes and we pan over the body again, you can see the Gerudo symbol on the cloak that the body was originally wearing. There also seems to be these golden hoops around the forearms and the ankle, and this is very similar to the ones you see on Sheikah monks, and this body is actually in a very similar state to a Sheikah monk. However, we know for sure this isn't a Sheikah, because it's got Gerudo clan symbols all over it. We also know that Sheikah monks are over 10,000 years old, and considering this body here is in a similar state and wearing similar kind of accessories, probably means that it's just as old, if not older, than the Sheikah monks themselves. Finally, we get a good look at the hand that's resting on the body's chest, and it seems to have the tips of its fingers dug deep into the body, exactly where this malice is pouring out from. We can also see that part of the chest directly underneath the palm of the hand has been raised up, either by the malice pushing its way out of the body, or the hand potentially pulling it up. And the actual hand itself and the attached forearm are glowing a ghostly pale colour, and we can also see something darker in colour flowing through the fingers, through the inside of the hand and up to the arm. And this could indicate that the hand is actually trying to absorb the malice we see flowing from the chest. There's also this ornate gold decoration around the hand, and if you look closely there is a green line that flows all the way up, and this is the same colour as the symbols we see flowing from the top of the hand. And these two could be related. It's possible that the hand is absorbing the malice and turning it into some kind of spell. And if you hadn't already guessed who this Gerudo with reddish hair is, yes, it appears to be Ganondorf. And what's so interesting about this is that the wound where Ganondorf was killed in Twilight Princess is the exact same spot that we see the hand resting on here. The next scene doesn't really show much new. We see the same thing again, apart from this time we get a look at the jewel on the head, which also helps confirm that this is Ganondorf. The only other interesting thing here is the actual palm of Ganondorf's hand. If you actually look at it, it appears to have a similar kind of pattern on it, and there's a hole in it, and this could possibly be to do with spells, or something along those lines. Next, we see Link absorbing that swirl of spells into his own arm, and we know it's the same thing as was coming from the ghostly arm, because we can see the 3-pointed symbol here in the bottom left, and if you actually look in the top left, you can see the very bottom of that symbol that looked like a Gerudo J or S. It's also worth noting that this seems to be wrapping itself around Link's arm, and seems to be attaching itself to him. Link also seems to be doing this voluntarily. If you actually rewind the video back to the start, you can see that Link is no longer wearing his glove that we see him wearing throughout the whole trailer. So he's clearly taken this off, and although he seems to be in pain here, he's willingly absorbing this kind of spell, or possibly ghostly being. And if Link is voluntarily allowing this arm to merge with his own, then the likelihood is that its intentions were good, and allowing it to attach to Link will probably assist him in some way during the sequel. In fact, during GDC 2017, the Zelda team actually showcased some concept art that depicted Link with some form of magical arm, a right arm that replaced his current one and could be used to conjure all sorts of useful weapons. And it's very possible that the developers are revisiting this previously unimplemented idea, and that we could see something similar come to fruition in the sequel. Interestingly, in the concept art, the Link with the magical arm also appears to be in possession of the Master Sword. However, it seems to be in a very sorry state, broken in half and severely damaged. And as I mentioned earlier, the Zelda team would have to do something in the sequel to limit the power provided by the Master Sword, as the players already have it. So if this ghostly arm is good, and Link is willingly allowing it to attach or to replace his arm, then that probably means that it's opposed to Ganon or Ganondorf. And the shot we saw before probably showed the arm trying to either prevent the malice from spreading, or prevent Ganondorf from being revived. Next we see an explosion of malice rising upwards towards a structure on the ceiling, and it follows a path of the previous stream of malice. And this seems to take place in the same chamber or the same room as we see earlier in the trailer. However, those green spell-like symbols are now missing, and the lack of symbols coincides with this explosion of malice, further supporting the idea that the arm or the hand was most likely trying to contain or stop the malice from leaking out of the body's chest. So, despite its creepy appearance, based on the footage in this trailer, the hand and the arm do appear to be good. We then see a hand reach down and clasp another, and thanks to the gloves, it's pretty easy to see that the hand at the top is Link's and the other is Zelda's. We can also clearly see that it's Link's right hand here, and he still appears to be wearing his glove, suggesting that this scene comes before Link's hand merges with the ghostly one. And, if you hadn't already guessed, the shots in this trailer are probably not in any particular order. If we watch the clip again, we can also see that Link doesn't seem to be catching Zelda's hand or trying to stop her fall, but instead simply just seems to be reaching down to give Zelda a hand up to higher ground. Meaning, Link and Zelda seem to be traversing or climbing uneven terrain in this shot, and it's not actually a shot of Link trying to save Zelda from falling. The next scene shows the camera zooming in on the entrance to what appears to be a temple. And the first thing you'll notice is how the entrance seems to be carved in the shape of some ancient tribal-like animal, with two giant feet or paws either side of the passageway inside. Now, this shot is particularly dark, making it harder to see the architecture on the outside. If we tweak the levels and exposure slightly, we can give ourselves a proper look at the temple entrance and see the finer details. And once we do this, two things become immediately clear. Firstly, the columns on the outside, just like all the other columns we've seen throughout the trailer, also feature that repeating Zonai serpent or dragon pattern. And secondly, this temple seems to have been built into the side of a mountain or a rocky cliffside, which explains a lack of natural light inside, and also matches up with the rocky walls and ceilings seen in previous shots. Interestingly, we can actually see something extremely similar in the first Breath of the Wild game. Down on Palmori Beach, directly behind the fragmented monument, there appears to be a large Zonai ruin embedded in the rocky cliffside. And it's unlikely that the temple shown in the trailer and that seen in the first game are actually the same one. However, this does open up the possibility of there being multiple Zonai temples built into the rock sides, and one of which may have been under our noses this whole entire time. The ghostly hand is then seen grabbing Link's wrist, and it seems to be preventing him from falling here. And unfortunately, this scene raises more questions than it actually answers, as the hand here isn't even the same ghostly hand that we've been following throughout the trailer so far. If we compare it to the one earlier, we can clearly see that this is a ghostly left hand and not the right hand that was holding back the malice. And this is noticeable due to the placement of the golden circle on the back of the hand, and a slightly varied design along the wrist and the back of the hand, and the fact that the thumb points in the opposite direction. Don't believe me? Check your own hands and copy the hand movements. It's clearly the opposite hand. So what does this mean? It means that instead of a solitary ghostly hand, there are actually two, and they both appear to be decorated the same, and possibly even belong to the same person. Could we possibly see an entire ghostly figure at some point in the game? Maybe. It's impossible to tell from the trailer, but having already seen two limbs, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. Finally, there's something extremely odd about one of the frames in this clip. If Link is falling, and wearing all the same gear as before, then what is this yellowish, hair-like object in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen? Is it coming out of this circular bracelet-like object? Also, is that Link's boot behind him, or something else? If it is Link's boot, then why is he falling with his knees completely bent? And why aren't his legs dangling down? It's extremely odd, and I can't really find an explanation for this. The closest thing I could find was Midna's hair, where it forms in a hand and has that shackle at the end. However, that seems like a bit of a stretch. On the flip side, there are a lot of similarities to the Twilight here. That pattern that we see in Twilight Princess is similar to the one seen on Ganon's hand. The green kind of flowing light that goes through this gold shape is also kind of shaped the same as the Twilight pattern, and the green symbols are glowing a similar colour. So there are some similarities here, and while it's not entirely impossible, I just think it seems like a bit of a stretch at this point. However, it could all be linked. After all, the Zonai serpent pattern does appear on Xant's shoulder, and Xant's shoes kind of look like the Zonai dragon or serpent head. So maybe there is a link, or maybe it's just all pure coincidence. It's hard to tell. Next we get another look at the chamber room, along with the body in hand. And this time, there's a flash of light and the true forms of both characters are briefly seen cast as shadows on the wall. The shadow of the body also closely resembles Ganondorf, reaffirming the conclusion we drew before. The ghost hand, however, seems to remain somewhat of a mystery, only revealing that the owner seems to be wearing a cloak. If we zoom in on Ganondorf's body here, we can also see that it seems to have two symbols on it. There seems to be an eye, possibly a Sheikah eye, on the kneecap, and there also seems to be two mysterious symbols on the chest just underneath his ribcage. A shot of Zelda dropping as she stands on some rocks is shown next, and this is probably the result of the malice exploding from the body and hitting the ceiling like we saw earlier. We can see rocks falling from the ceiling and particles of malice floating around, suggesting this occurred after the explosion of malice. It's also worth noting that Zelda doesn't drop all the way down, and simply drops a few feet along with the ledge. And we know this because the last few frames, just before the scene cuts, show the ledge staying in place as Zelda continues to bend her knees in an attempt to regain her balance. Zelda then witnesses the mummified Ganon's hand begin to twitch, suggesting that Ganondorf is coming alive here. And just like the previous shot, we can see particles of malice floating around from the explosion. However, Zelda appears to be holding a torch here, and she wasn't in the scene where she dropped on the ledge. So if this scene follows the last, then there's been a reasonable amount of time between for Zelda to prepare herself and continue her exploration of the chamber. Zelda also seems to be stood directly in front of the body here, looking at Ganondorf's right hand. So she's not on the steps to the side of the body, as we saw when she was accompanied by Link. This means that Zelda has purposely walked around the pedestal and has gone to inspect the body from a different angle. The next scene shows Zelda turning around in shock, and this also occurs after the explosion because we can see the malice particles floating around in the background. She's not holding a torch here either, so this scene likely isn't the same as the one where she's watching the hand twitch. So she probably sees something else, possibly the explosion itself, or another body part move, which has caused her to be surprised. We then see Ganondorf's head drop back and his eyes light up, revealing slit pupils as he suddenly comes alive. We know this scene must occur at a similar time to the others, as we see the malice particles in the background still, and the direction in which Ganondorf's corpse looks also suggests he's looking towards the steps where Zelda and Link were stood before. The final scenes show a seemingly peaceful Hyrule, disturbed by what appears to be the castle rising up from the ground below. And this is shortly followed by the green spell-like symbols slowly fading away. And there's a lot more going on here than originally meets the eye. If we compare the scenic shot of Hyrule against a similar shot taken from the original Breath of the Wild game, we can see that there are some differences between the two. Firstly, this shrine over on the right hand side is no longer there, suggesting that shrines are most likely a thing of the past. The Sheikah towers, scattered across the land, are now also completely gone. In fact, all Sheikah technology, including the Divine Beast on Death Mountain, seem to have been removed. And if we actually go back and check Link and Zelda, neither of them seem to have the Sheikah Slate anymore. It's not attached to their belt like it usually is. So that suggests that the Sheikah Slate is no longer in use either. And this kind of makes sense. After the Calamity Ganon took control of Sheikah technology and turned it against Hyrule, it would only be logical to either seal away or destroy it, to prevent something similar happening again in the future. So what does this mean for the Breath of the Wild sequel? Well, Sheikah Shrines, the little mini dungeons, are probably no longer in play, and in their place we're probably looking at larger Zonai temples and ruins that we can explore. Also, the Sheikah Slate and its upgrades and all the in-game mechanics it provided are also apparently no longer in play. But don't worry, that magic arm we saw earlier, or whatever Link is merging with here, will probably take its place and provide similar mechanics and similar upgrades depending on how many temples or Zonai ruins that you complete. In fact, this scene here might actually be Link receiving an upgrade, and the upgrades might be Zonai spells. After all, the Zonai were magic wielders. And finally, I guess we should talk about Hyrule Castle, and why it's rising up from the earth. And this too, just like the magical arm, is also similar to something the devs showed at GDC 2017. In this concept art we see a helmeted Ganon stood atop of a rising mound of earth. If this is any indication, Hyrule Castle could too be rising from the earth due to the revival of Ganondorf. And before we go, it's also worth noting that Hyrule Castle might not be the only thing rising here. If you actually look to the right of the screen, less than a second after Hyrule Castle begins to rise, we can see another formation of smoke rising directly upwards from the bottomless swamp. And not only is this a place heavily infested with malice, it's also home to a giant skull, just so happens to look very similar to the ancient headgear. And directly beside it, a whole bunch of Zonai towers. Thanks for watching guys, and kudos to you if you made it through all 46 minutes of this analysis. If you liked the video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up, and do the subscribe thing if you'd like to be notified about future videos. And if you'd like to get hold of a copy of the symbols we took from this analysis, or you'd like a copy of that cleaned up hidden audio message, you can also download those for absolutely free from our Patreon page. There's also a link down in the description, and if you want to go check out the interviews I mentioned in this analysis, there's links to those too. So subscribe, comment below and let me know your theories, and I'll see you guys next time.